The Lighthouse is one of the most popular kids' cartoons of all time. It is also one of the most infamous. Over the past decade, we've seen a vast array of cartoons come out. Some good, some bad, some meh. But no matter the quality, there are some shows out there that I just choose not to watch. Not for any particular reason or preconceived notion or anything. I could hear that a new show is the best thing on God's green earth, but sometimes there's just a part of me that says, I don't really care. I'm sure we can all relate. Sometimes you're just not feeling it. Who knows, maybe someday you'll finally give it a shot and see what all the hype was about. Or you'll hate it, I don't know, I'm not you. But then there are times where you decide to purposefully avoid something like The Plague. Either due to having it praised so much that you choose to not engage out of some deep down desire to be a contrarian, and not fit in with societal norms, man. Or you hear so much bad about it that you know interacting will open a hornet's nest that you just don't want to deal with. And for me personally, that show has always been The Lighthouse. First airing on Nickelodeon in 2016 and created by The Lighthouse marked a monumental moment in the channel's history, being the first time since, arguably, The Fairly OddParents, that a series could rival the likes of their moneymaker, SpongeBob. See, The Lighthouse came out at a very troubled time for the network. Nothing was sticking. The golden age of their live-action sitcoms was coming to an end, as well as their animated programming severely struggling to gain any footing. Either had shows that were massive critical failures becoming infamous in internet discussion like Sanjay and Craig or Breadwinners, or you had shows which did well critically, but failed to really build up an audience like Harvey Beaks. A large part of this was on Nickelodeon. Scratch that, this was all on Nickelodeon, seemingly brushing aside promising and refreshing new shows in favor of relying on that dude bro buddy comedy formula that had worked so well in the past. As long as not letting really any of their new series have a moment in the spotlight. A time to shine and build an audience of dedicated viewers. For a long time, including arguably right now, it often seems like Nickelodeon treated their non-SpongeBob programming as, well, filler in between SpongeBob. But one show broke through that pattern. One series managed to rise the ranks, and for a brief period, was able to surpass their spongy overlords. Of course, the show I'm referring to is The Fairly OddParents. However, by 2016, that show had long run its course, not knowing what to do with itself. And in that rut, a new show was allowed to burst through the gate and capture the attention of kids all around the world. And that was this little show called The Lighthouse. Starring the aptly titled Loud family, the show saw a middle kid Linking Loud trying to survive in a house full of nothing but sisters. 10 of them to be exact. They also had this charming Peanuts-esque gimmick where you'd never see the parents' face so they could truly hone in on the childlike nature of everything, being completely from the kids' perspective. Although they did eventually give up on that in the season 2 episode, 11 Louds a Leapin'. In a time when Nickelodeon was nothing more than the butt of all jokes regarding kids' networks, in the eyes of many being seen as the worst between it, Cartoon Network, and Disney Channel, The Lighthouse was consistently touted as being its one saving grace, the one success that managed to slip through the cracks and stand apart, being seen as not only a critical success, but commercial too. Everybody loved this show. Again, there was a period where it was considered the best series Nickelodeon had produced in like a decade. Nickelodeon was back. Me though, I didn't care. The Lighthouse released right at the moment I considered myself to be too old for cartoons, so my main exposure to the franchise was seeing folks sing its praises in between modern SpongeBob rants and going, huh, good for them, and then moving on with my time, presumably to record Let's Plays in my garage.
I'm going to be doing a creeper head to start a ride, and it's no reason to do it, so.
That rundown may seem strange for some who weren't around for its meteoric rise, however, as today, almost 10 years since its premiere, The Lighthouse is nothing more than Nickelodeon's biggest laughingstock. Similarly to The Fairly OddParents, many say the show has long run its course, being stretched thin with spin-offs and movies that don't even attempt to capture what many liked about the series to begin with. And that's just the stuff related to the show. Other areas are much worse. And so today I wanted to take a look at The Lighthouse and its reputation, why it's so heated. How did we get here? At least compared to other cartoons that also are considered to have gone down in quality, there are people out there who are actively embarrassed to admit they ever liked this show. So all I can ask is, why is The Lighthouse so heated? Well, first, I guess we need to briefly cover why the show was so well liked in the first place. It couldn't seriously just be because there was nothing better to watch, right? I think what stuck out about The Lighthouse to a lot of folks out there was that it was something different to the norm, especially for Nick. You know, it wasn't a series about two idiot friends who love soda and farting where half the jokes are just characters screaming. It had a simple premise, which it used to its fullest. There's so many characters that a kid is bound to like at least one of them. It's got a fantastic comic book inspired art style paired with some really appealing rigged animation. And on top of all that, the show's core, Linking Loud, was a really endearing straight man. In an era where more serialized programming was becoming the norm, I'm sure it was refreshing to have a cartoon that just embraced being a cartoon. Again, the show I'd probably compare it to most would be The Fairly OddParents, which had an equally basic and contained premise. It knew exactly what it wanted to be, and if there's something we know about shows with contained premises like these, it's that they can be milked to death until the end of time with endless storytelling potential. Wait, I think there's 3 main reasons why The Lighthouse is so detested, especially today. 3 reasons for it going from a breath of fresh air that took us back to a simpler time, to a despised cartoon that most would rather see finally be taken out back and put out of its misery. So here's my 3 reasons why is The Lighthouse so hated. Number 1. The show got bad. Like The Fairly OddParents, again, these shows are pretty similar. One of the main things folks know about the show, even if they haven't watched it, is that it eventually went into seasonal rot, continuing to decrease in quality and lose its own identity, leaving those who liked it devastated, and those who hated it feeling validated. The Lighthouse is Nick's second longest running series, despite The Fairly OddParents I'd argue leaving a bigger cultural impact. But it's managed to truck along for 177 episodes, not counting movies, specials, or spin-offs. Now, any show that's ran for that long is bound to change over time. It's impossible to keep up the same level of quality without something starting to change. And while in some cases, TV shows can use this as an opportunity to go in a different, but just as good, sometimes better direction, American Dad comes to mind for no particular reason, with the show later embracing its craziness and stepping away from the more grounded political angle it started as. Whereas other shows completely fumble at this, and it results in them alienating their audience who no longer see what made them fall in love with it in the first place. The Lighthouse was in a bad spot to begin with, where its premise was rather limited. Despite having 11 main characters, Lincoln Loud was the core. The show was based around his everyday, and how he managed to live in a house with 10 other siblings. Just hearing that idea sounds like a nightmare. Having to deal with that many characters is a recipe for disaster with no focus. You know, if a kid likes one of them, then great. There's a 1 in 10 chance I'll actually get to see them do anything of substance each episode. But I think they were clever in treating the sisters more like a unit. When I picture them in my mind, I don't see them all individually, I just think of that crowd, them all piled together. And because of this, along with each of them having one clearly defined trait you could gather simply by looking at them, it allowed the show to involve all its cast without ever starting to feel bloated. It allowed them to still focus on one single character, sometimes Lincoln, sometimes a sister, but a large aspect of the story was how the family as a unit would react. You know, you can have episodes where one of them gets put in charge of the house, or Lincoln Loud trying to get each of them through their morning routine, us getting to see how each of them react when put in these situations. They all have such basic traits that it allows them to move through each of them at a breakneck speed so nobody's left out. Everybody gets their moment to shine. Obviously, not every episode adhered to this early on, and the later seasons aren't devoid of episodes that return to this formula, but at its most generic state, that is the appeal of The Lighthouse. And if there's something you can quickly grasp from that rundown, it's that you're gonna run out of things to do with that premise fast. There's only so many relatable family situations these characters can find themselves in before you start to be held back by how flat they are. There's not much investment, and so as the series went on, you'd see them naturally start to try and expand on this world. Now we see the parents, so they can be more heavily involved in the adventures too. There's more of a focus on their school lives, so we can introduce more of Lincoln's friends or one of his sister's groups. Everyone has their own world the more the show expands, and while that undoubtedly is good for giving them more stories to tell, it's hard to deny some of the appeal of the show is lost because of that. It's no longer the Lighthouse, and is now one of the Loud sisters dealing with her own issue. The show was such a hit that it didn't have to prove anything anymore. It can just be assumed that you've already grown accustomed to these characters and know what they're like. That's not to even mention that horrible movie that introduces dragons and ghosts and the Scottish. Gross. At that point, it's completely lost its initial vision. The show is not just about the family without needing to adhere to the gimmick it was based around. It had to happen, of course, to ensure its longevity, but at the same time, the question has to be asked of whether or not that benefits this series. The elephant in the room is obviously the show's creator, Chris Savino, who was fired very early into the show's run after sexual harassment allegations. And while that's obviously a good thing, I'm sure there's an argument to be made about the show's shift away from its core premise being a result of losing the person who presumably understood it the best. Maybe that's not the case, though. I mean, look at other shows that face similar circumstances like Clarence, whose creator was fired for the exact same thing. I'd argue that show only started to flourish the further it went. Why couldn't we have had 8 seasons of that show instead? What the fuck? 2. Oversaturation. This point is fairly self-explanatory. Not only does this show have 8 long seasons, by the way, when I said it had 177 episodes earlier, that was not counting individual 11-minute segments. If we go by that, then the show actually has 272 episodes. Jesus. There's an argument to be made about that being too long for any TV show to run. How could any series remain good after that long? But don't you worry. It gets so much worse. In regular Nickelodeon fashion, they abide by the law. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And with the main series only continuing to win in popularity, they've attempted to rejuvenate interest in a couple ways, like that aforementioned shitty movie where they didn't even bother drawing linking for the poster. Another movie, which recently released where he's a spy. Haven't seen that before. Then they decided they would make a fucking live-action series that runs concurrently to the main one? Why? This is quite possibly the worst show to do in live action. These kids are gonna age pretty quickly, and that's gonna get real distracting. It's a good thing this is clearly gonna crash and burn. They just released a new season less than a week ago? Then that spin-off got its own 2 movies, which posters look to be on the same level as Santa Paws. And finally, as if all that wasn't enough, there was also the other spin-off, in which we saw the classic Lighthouse character, Ronnie Ann, move in with their own large family, in which we get to see pretty much the same show again, just with a different set of characters. Who wanted this? This show wasn't the biggest success, but still managed to run for 3 seasons with over 100 episodes, so it's clear Nick had a lot of confidence in it. It even got its own movie that was released a month or 2 ago after being stuck in limbo for years. This much of one thing is just bad for any series, especially a concept as simple as the Lighthouse. It was a recipe for disaster anyone could have seen coming, and that's not to even mention the quality of these programs. Obviously, all this put a sour taste in the minds of people who already didn't like the direction in which the series was going. The show that was originally seen as the breath of fresh air, something other than SpongeBob, had suddenly become its own SpongeBob, worse as a matter of fact, being milked to death with no signs of stopping. But that's not the biggest factor as to why this show is so despised, oh no. There's one aspect that prevails over all else, which remains to be the reason why many find this show so horrid. 3. The Fanbase.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
By far, the most infamous aspect of the Lighthouse today would have to be its fanbase. Again, I would not blame someone for being embarrassed to openly admit they like this series. And it's for one simple reason. This is a show about a bunch of little girls that was created by a man who was fired from said show for sexually harassing women. You just can't move past that. This, of course, is only made worse by the way some fans choose to talk about the show and these characters. Really not helping yourself there. And let me just say, I feel genuinely bad for some Lighthouse fans. Not all. Not all. Again, some of those fuckers are asking for it. But if you simply like this show for no other reason than you just find it funny or it's comforting or you just grew up with it and still like to check in every now and then I am sorry you are continuously lumped in with these weirdos. But it's just one of those things that you're not going to be able to shake. Which in turn has made a large majority of the fanbase incredibly defensive, continuously coming to the defense of their favorite kids show, which therefore makes people laugh at them more. Now, of course, most folks making these jokes treat it as nothing more than that, jokes. It's funny to point out how weird and creepy the marketing around this show is at times, but I do think it's a little unfair to lump all these fans in together. Again, if you like this show and are not a weird, creepy creep, then cool, I'm proud of you. But it's just the result of so much bad. Over the past decade, this series has just left such a sour taste in people's mouths. The circumstances with the creator, the more vocal, weird parts of the fan base, and the sheer fact that the show isn't even all that good anymore, have all resulted in the Lighthouse and its fans remaining as nothing more than another internet laughingstock. Ironically, the show that once put an end to those bombastic and Nickelodeon rants is now being pointed to highlight the network's current dark age. And for that, I'm truly sorry, Lighthouse fans. Not all of you though, some of you guys are weird.